Hello people, finished a book. I know I just uploaded a video, but this one only took me 4 days to finish. July 14th, it's another Emil Ludwig book. I don't have too many notes on this. This is an old book. Both this book and the one that I read before, I'm actually lucky to have been able to finish them without, the backing falling apart on the book or something. And I could feel this one cracking a little bit as I almost finished. This book was written in 1929. It's 378 pages. And like The Guns of August is the month of August in 1914. This book is the month of July in 1914. And of course the war didn't really start until August 4th. And this is all the machinations of the politicians and the counts and the generals and the Kaisers and the Tsars. Gives a really good account of the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand, and I'm going to read it. It's kind of long. Page 31. Hopefully nobody can hear the power washer that's going on outside. Power washer down here in Florida is kind of a familiar noise these days. I used it here. I tried to clean out our pool. But there has been a boat upside down in the canal for 8 weeks now. And finally yesterday they flipped it over and they're trying to clean it off now. If I was Trump, I would say, whose boat is that? Page 31. The Archduke. He is the heir apparent to the Habsburg throne. The rest of the Habsburg nobility don't really care for him. Franz Ferdinand doesn't really care for him. And they also don't care for the wife that he has picked out, but he loves her. They have children together. And they're traveling together, and they're in Sarajevo. And the Serbs don't really care to be part of Greater Austria. So, suddenly 2 shots rang out from the right-hand side of the street, not 10 feet away. Apparently no one is hurt. The governor, perceiving too late that Sarajevo is full of assassins, there had been a bomb attempt, not, more than a mile before this, leaps up and tells the chauffeur to turn back and make for another bridge. At this moment, the Duchess sinks upon her husband's breast. The governor hears a few murmured words pass between the two. Now, and not till now, does he realize that something may have happened. But the Archduke sits upright. The suite comes running up. No one yet perceives that he has been hit. In his wife's case, too, they suspect no more than a faint. Then blood gushes from his mouth. He sinks crookedly down. They open his uniform. Blood spurts from the great artery on the right side of the neck, over his green uniform and over the cushions of the car. The Duchess, who has been leaning against him as though she had turned to him for protection, is unconscious, but no wound is visible. They drive to the government buildings. The 2 are carried up to a room next to that in which the champagne bottles are cooling. Doctors find a bullet wound in her abdomen, while the Archduke is bleeding to death from a severed artery. A Franciscan monk gives them both absolution. Then arrives the Archbishop who had warned him. A quarter of an hour later, death has come to the Archduke, Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Este, heir apparent to the Habsburg monarchy. They spell it with a P here, Habsburg. A few minutes before him died Sophie, Countess Chotek, Duchess of Hohenberg, the only human being in whom this misanthrope trusted, and the very one rejected by the rest of the world. His last words may have been for her, hers for him. No one overheard them. There was no one to mourn for him. Only the children weep in the Belvedere Palace. Belvedere Palace. There's a guy named Count Tisza. He's Hungarian. He's a dueling champion. He's a very interesting guy. He's a very sensible man. After the Archduke is assassinated, uh, the Austrians want satisfaction from Serbia, and they end up sending them an ultimatum saying, if you don't agree to these, I think there's 8 points, then we will declare war and invade your country. This Count Tisza wants the Austrians to not be so harsh with these 8 points. He also talks to the Serbs and says, accept this shit. And the Serbs actually do accept it. They have a little bit of argument about some of the points. They don't want, they want to take care of the assassin themselves. They don't want Austrian police and Austrian officers, military officers, to be involved in any of that. Serbia actually accepts this shit, even though it's in here, but I'm not going to read it. It's very harsh, this ultimatum. And they only give them like 18 hours to accept it. Serbia actually screws them up and accepts it. So then the Austrians have to resort to many lies. The Russians also don't want this to go down without a world war, because the Russians want to rush in there and aid Serbia, which is their ally, but not through any kind of altruism, but because the Russians want to get their troops even closer to Constantinople. Do versus Psi, it's S-I-E. Many books that I read make a big deal about whether somebody addresses someone else with the formal do, and it's spelled D-U. If you want to really get confused about some German terminology, look up do versus Psi, because especially Psi has many multiple meanings. It can mean they, it can mean she, it can mean you, and it all depends on how you feel about this person that you're addressing. So when you want to put somebody at ease, when you want to let this person know that you really care for them, you address them as do, not Psi. The medium, bottom of 78, top of 81. The media really plays a big deal with all of this, much like it did in Rwanda, much like it does here in the United States. In Vienna, where there is no parliament to disturb the circle of warmongers, public opinion is being manipulated all the more vigorously. A large portion of the press is fulminating against Serbia, against that gang of robbers and murderers, the sheep stealers, the nation of lice. By the middle of the month, the violence is far greater than at the beginning. And since the Belgrade papers answer in just the same way, the question arises, who began it? Let it not be answered here or ever. It is the Delphic riddle of the war, for which any solution suits and none suffices. That's the way Ludwig writes. I really like the way he writes. I got one more that I may start. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. I have just now finished this book. Mobilizing the troops. You can't just look and see at who declared war first. You have to look at who mobilized their troops first. And it appears from what I have just read that Austria is the guilty party for starting the whole thing. And Russia comes number 2. Entire pages. Page 311, 312, and 313. It's 378 pages, but it's really large print, and the pages are small. And I think this is all, Jesus, I'm at 10 minutes already. During these negotiations between Berlin and London, there was one moment in which it seemed as though the war between France and Germany might be stopped by a guarantee from Great Britain. There was, indeed, a misunderstanding, but the treatment accorded to the case reveals in a flash the dominating nature of the army machine, which no one can stop when once he has wound it up. The horror of the chief of the general staff in Petersburg, and when he says Petersburg, he means St. Petersburg, when the Tsar tried to take it out of his hands, was reciprocated 2 days later by his colleague in Berlin. Thus, after that reassuring news from London, the Kaiser said to Moltke, "Well then, we shall simply set our whole army advancing in the east." Moltke: "That is impossible, your majesty. The advance of an army 1,000,000 strong cannot be improvised. If your majesty insists on sending the whole army east, you will only have a wild rabble of disorganized armed men without supplies." The Kaiser: "Your uncle would have answered me differently." Moltke: "It is absolutely impossible to advance otherwise than according to plan. Strong in the west, weak in the east." And when he says, "Your uncle, you would have advised me differently," there was Moltke the elder, who was in the Franco-Prussian War. Thereupon the Kaiser wires to the King of England, "On technical grounds, my mobilization, which had already been proclaimed this afternoon, must proceed against 2 fronts, east and west, as prepared. I hope that France will not become nervous." 2 days later, the Kaiser, wishing to mitigate the effect of the unavoidable threat which the advance to the frontier must convey, gives orders. The 16th Division in Treves is not to proceed to Luxembourg. Moltke, who describes this scene, confesses, "I felt as if my heart would break. Once again the danger arose of our advance being thrown into confusion. When I got home I was quite worn out, and I shed tears of desperation. So I sat in my room, dejectedly and idle, until at 11 p.m. I was again ordered to go to His Majesty. Explanations, mistake, war against France, advance as arranged." Moltke ends, "I was never able to get over the impression of this event. Something in me had been destroyed which could never be replaced. Confidence and trust were shaken. The logic of the machine crushed its maker and turned him into its slave." Januszkiewicz and Moltke, in whom the thoughts, the labors, the visions, the ambitions of a lifetime had been centered on war, suffered the most terrible moments of their lives when their precious toys, set in motion at last, were suddenly bidden to stand still again. "Something in me had been destroyed," writes the warrior, before beginning his own work of destruction. Thanks for watching.